Most detective stories ask who did it, but in Fyodor Dostoevsky's 1866 novel Crime and Punishment, the identity of the killer is revealed almost immediately. The real mystery we are trying to solve is why he did it, and how his own mind turns against him in the aftermath. The crime does not happen in a vacuum. It takes place in the sweltering, dust-choked summer of 1860s St. Petersburg. The cramped canals, the staggering poverty, and the stench of the streets act as an incubator for a very specific type of ideological madness. St. Petersburg was a city decreed into existence by Tsar Peter the Great. Built on a swamp at the cost of thousands of laborers' lives, it was a rigidly planned, abstract imperial project where human beings were often sacrificed for a grand overarching vision. Trapped in a suffocating, closet-sized rented room in this very city is Rodion Raskolnikov. He is a former law student, deeply impoverished, severely isolated, and consumed by his own perceived intellectual superiority. Pacing in his stifling room, Raskolnikov develops a theory. He divides humanity into two categories: ordinary people who must obey the rules, and extraordinary men, figures like Napoleon, who are entirely exempt from standard moral laws if their actions advance human progress. He applies this theory to his own crushing financial desperation. He calculates that killing a wealthy, unscrupulous pawnbroker and redistributing her hoarded money is a net positive for society. To his mind, it is simple utilitarian math. Utilitarianism is a philosophy that determines right from wrong by focusing on outcomes, specifically aiming for the greatest good for the greatest number of people. When human lives are reduced to abstract data points in a mathematical equation, even the most brutal violence can appear entirely logical to an arrogant mind. Raskolnikov executes his plan, but the pristine logic of his theory collapses instantly. The pawnbroker's innocent, vulnerable sister, Lizaveta, unexpectedly walks in on the scene, forcing him to commit a second, completely uncalculated murder just to protect himself. The sterile, perfect crime he imagined in his tiny room does not survive contact with reality. The unpredictable chaos of human existence immediately shatters his philosophical equation. A literary analysis points out a brilliant detail Dostoevsky embedded. The Russian word raskol translates to schism. This describes Raskolnikov's state, torn between his cold, hyper-rational intellect justifying the slaughter and his deeply suppressed capacity for pity. This mental fracture physically attacks his body. He falls into feverish delirium, suffers sudden fainting spells, and wanders the streets muttering in loops of paranoid terror. He discovers that he cannot simply think his way out of guilt. The human nervous system and the innate conscience will forcibly reject any ideology that tries to amputate basic empathy. Following the murders, Raskolnikov's splintered mind is pulled in opposite directions by two powerful external forces. First is examining magistrate Porfiry Petrovich. He does not use physical evidence to trap his suspect. Instead, he engages Raskolnikov in a thrilling game of psychological warfare, using the student's own published articles on crime to corner his intellect. Then there is Sonia Marmeladov, the spiritual counterweight to Porfiry's intellect. Sonia is a gentle, deeply religious young woman living in extreme poverty who has been forced into sex work to keep her starving family alive. To do this legally in 1860s Russia, Sonia had to carry a yellow ticket. This official state-issued identification card heavily regulated and institutionalized prostitution, forcing women to register with the medical police and subjecting them to constant societal humiliation. Raskolnikov sacrificed the lives of others to serve an arrogant, abstract theory. Sonia, by contrast, sacrifices her own body and social standing out of a desperate, unconditional love for her family. Through her quiet endurance, she demonstrates a truth Raskolnikov's intellect failed to grasp. True moral strength is not found in dominating others, but in willingly bearing suffering to preserve human connection. Ultimately, it is not the police who defeat Raskolnikov. He turns himself in because the agonizing weight of his own isolation becomes entirely unbearable, causing a complete psychological collapse. His attempt to live as an extraordinary Superman fails completely. He proves through his own torment that a person cannot successfully sever themselves from the moral fabric of humanity. In the novel's epilogue, Raskolnikov serves his sentence in the freezing, desolate prison camps of Siberia, bound in heavy iron shackles. Yet the physical confines of the prison do not immediately change him. He remains bitter and aloof for months. True rehabilitation only begins when the last remnants of his intellectual arrogance are finally stripped away. Sonia follows him to Siberia, waiting patiently. When Raskolnikov allows himself to accept her unconditional love and embraces the shared suffering of those around him, his hardened rationalism breaks, triggering a genuine spiritual resurrection. Fyodor Dostoevsky's meticulous autopsy of this fictional murderer was directed at the very real radical movements brewing in Russia during his lifetime. He leaves us with a stark warning. Any political ideology, any utilitarian logic, or grand theory that attempts to erase our shared human empathy will inevitably lead to its own destruction.